most people think that if they go viral on TikTok, they're everywhere and that's brand, and it's definitely not. I think that over optimizing your personal brand is a mistake. People should focus much more on the human IP and spend more time figuring out who they are, what their essence is, what their story is. Optimize that. When you position it in a way that is unmatched, people can't really copy you.
Oh, Anna, what's the most common mistake that people make when with their personal brand?
Oh, this is such a good question. And I think not a lot of people think about this, but I think that over optimizing your personal brand is a mistake. The way that I think about it is your human IP is what really is your essence, and your personal brand, the way we understand personal brand today, it's merely the outside layer of who you are. Think of it like this. It's like brand and performance marketing. So, like brand is the essence and performance marketing is what you do to optimize the brand and get that brand across to many more people. And I think personal brand is a little bit like that, like performance marketing. It's how you dress and what you want to be known for and how you optimize your LinkedIn posts and, what events you go to and where you show up, how you show up. But it's not necessarily exactly who you are at the core, right? It has to be authentic for sure, but it's much more optimized for, how we want people to see us as opposed to who we really are on the inside. So I think that the biggest mistake is that people over optimize that outside layer and they want that to be perfect. Whereas I think people should focus much more on the human IP and spend more time figuring out who they are, what their essence is, what their story is, what their, special skills are that they have accumulated over time. Spend more time on that, optimize that, understand actually more of that inner strength in order to be then ready to have a personal brand that is external that you can show to the world in a much more authentic and optimized way.
Oh, Anna, what is a brand you wish you had created yourself?
I don't know. I love so many brands. I'm such a brand freak. I love brands a lot. And I have many, many favorite brands. But I think that there's something about the magic of Apple at the very beginning when, maybe I just secretly wish I were Steve Jobs, having that brilliance and the way that he could bring people into his world and bring people along the ride of what he was building. I think that that was quite unique. And in the way that the product turned out, based on that brilliance that he had and of that vision that he had, I would love to create something like that. So it's either probably Apple or Pixar because, both are created by Steve Jobs. And it's so interesting how he created Pixar at the same time as he created a technology brand and both of those things are still today. And you can see how creative both companies really are at the core. So yeah, probably those two.
I can really see the essence of also unmatched along the think differently because it's about being different.
Yeah, that's kind of my mission. I want to bring this sort of change and of mindset shift into the world through Unmatched, because essentially Unmatched is so interesting. It has two different layers. The word itself means you don't have to be like everyone else, and also nobody else can really copy you. And when I landed on this word, I just felt such relief, because it just gives you such a peace of mind knowing that you don't have to compete with anyone and that nobody else needs to be who you are and you can't be copied. It's, for me as a marketer, I think that finding your unmatched space, it just gives you the freedom to be creative and to really think big without the normal limitations of what the industry tells you to do and the typical benchmarks that you look at. So yeah, I really hope that Unmatched turns to be one of those big companies like Apple and Pixar.
Well, we're definitely cheering for. What do you think it's harder, protecting an idea or positioning it?
Oh, I definitely think positioning it is probably the hardest part. I think that protecting an idea comes after you have actually thought of the idea in the first place. And for sure, the protection part is important, and it's not always easy because it needs to be very specific. I mean, trademark is a defense mechanism in reality. So it has to be very specific and not too broad in order for you to be able to trademark a name or a framework or an idea. So I'm definitely not downplaying the importance of, trademarking and protecting what you want to own and your ideas. But to be very honest with you, I think that the idea itself, coming up with it and finding a way to position it in a way that, as I always like to call it, in an unmatched way, I think it's the hardest part. Because what typically happens, and this is the biggest mistake that I see a lot of founders and brands do, is that when they, come up with an idea, the first thing that they do, they look at the competition. So they look around and see what others in the space are doing, and they try to mimic that and try to fit in the industry standards and try to create something that is more or less similar to something else that is successful, right? And that's not really the best way to go at it. The best way would be to look at yourself, look at you as a founder, look at the source of inspiration for the brand, the story, where it came from, what's the insight, what's the consumer insight that you have come up with in order to create that product or business or brand, and try to craft it in a way that it's uniquely positioned. That's ideally the case. If you look at the biggest brands like Apple or Nike, that's what they have done. They have created their unique space that nobody really owns. So crafting that positioning is critical, because when you position it in a way that is unmatched, people can't really copy you, which is exactly what the trademark is there to do, is to protect you from other people using what you've created.
What would you say to someone who says that trademarking is too expensive?
I mean, I would say wait until you see how expensive it is when somebody copies your brand. Wait and see how expensive it is when you have to start suing people that start to use your ideas or your logos or your product. And I don't think you want that. I think you want to, think ahead, figure out how big you want to make your business or your brand become, to which extent you're going to use your products, in which territories, in which countries, which categories, and start slowly but surely trademarking from day one. To give you an example, I have trademarked already the word unmatched, knowing that I'm going to start a merch line sooner than later, and I'm going to use it across different categories like, advisory, for example, services, and so on. So I have that already protected. Do I have it protected globally? No, because it's very expensive to do that since, day one. But as your brand grows and it expands, you have to start adding more and more territory so that you eventually get full protection across the globe.
And would you say it's like really from day one? What happens if the person is not 100% sure where they are or where they're going?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's not when you trademark anything, right? So if you don't have clarity on your positioning and what you're building, then probably it's not the right time to trademark anything. But if you've landed on, let's say, a method or a framework or a concept or a brand name that you're going to consistently use on product, especially knowing how we live in a very social media driven world that literally anything can go viral, in 24 hours, what you don't want is to lose the opportunity of protection, of protecting your brand and your products before you launch something into the world. So I would definitely say yes since day one, but with the caveat that you have to have the clarity about what the brand is and what the product is.
What would you say comes first, brand or personality?
It must be personality, I think, because the brand as a whole is an expression of that personality. So, in many cases, there's a founder who comes up with an idea. That founder has a personality, has values, has a vision of what they want to create. And the products and the brand that he's created at the very, very beginning, it mimics the values and the personality of the founder. You can see it in so many cases with so many of the brands that we love. If you go back to the history of the brand, you see how the founder just infused the brand with all of their, brilliance and personality and charisma and just vision of what they wanted to create. Now, as the brand evolves, the brand starts to take its own personality and to evolve that. It's a little bit like having a small child. At the beginning, they mimic everything they see in their parents, and as they grow older and older, they develop their own personality. And so with the brand, it's exactly the same, because the more time the brand spends in in real life with real consumers, those consumers start to make it their own. The brand stops being so connected to the founder, and it starts being more connected to the end consumer, as it should be. So it starts to reflect more of the culture, of the environment, political moment that the world is in, and just the consumer vibe overall. So that personality over time just expands into something else than how it started, but it's important to have a brand essence. And I think this is where a lot of brands over time, as they grow, they start to lose a little bit of that essence, because they start, taking more and more cues from the world and less from, the starting point, the story of where it all started, and their founders, which is absolutely normal. I think it's just a matter of fine-tuning that without losing touch with, what the brand is, and what that initial vision actually was about.
Yes, I think I love brands also that have a really strong personality component, and also like that they have a person like a Steve Jobs, like a Richard Branson or something like this, that they still keep in the brand and they keep infusing that personality to the brand. Would you say that there's like a certain size of the company where that becomes separated, or that they keep, like this infusion of personality that stay throughout the life of the brand?
No, absolutely. You need people behind your brand, and I call that human IP. In big brands like Apple or Nike, you will see that human IP being the athlete or the celebrities, the collaborators that they start working with, and those people actually embody the values of the brand. So, as the brand grows, it's not just the founder figure who drives the message of the brand, but it's also more people like partners and collaborators and, celebrities or influencers that start to take that message, make it their own, and share it with the world through their own lens. So having personality is super important. Having people behind your brand that drive your message forward is absolutely crucial. And the more you grow as a brand, the more you need that at scale in order to reach more and more consumers.
Do you think it's more important to be consistent or to have differentiation?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think I would say consistency is definitely key. I mean, it depends which industry you play in. I think you don't always need to be so different from everyone else. Sometimes there's industries where actually you don't have as much competition, so you don't have to stand out in such a big way as in other industries like beauty, for example. Like, you get lost in the beauty industry right now if you don't come up with something new that really stands out, or the beverage industry, for example. Like, think of Liquid Death and how they started to position just regular water in such an amazing design of a can that simply stood out. So those are very specific examples, but there's other industries where you can just literally play the game and not necessarily stand out. I think that's why consistency on the other side, whichever segment you have to play in, is really, really important, because what you want is you want to solidify that positioning in whichever market you are, so that the consumer understands what you're doing, who you are as a brand. And you have to understand also that consumers evolve, and so over time that consistency will build your brand equity. One example that is really good for this is Coca-Cola. I mean, Coca-Cola has one design of, the bottle, and it always uses the color red. And, as much as the marketers in the company, I'm pretty sure they're super ready to drop the red and change colors and make something more poppy and modern. Actually, the red of the brand is what makes the brand recognizable from every other beverage brand or cola brand in that industry. So it's important. Consistency is definitely probably the most important thing to look at.
How careful do you have to be if you decide to, let's say, readjust or rebrand?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because what tends to happen is there's a new CEO and they want to change everything. They come in with a new team and there's a new CPO, CMO, and all of a sudden they need to prove something. And so they're like, oh, I'm going to just change everything because XYZ, their previous this experience tells them something. I think you need to be very, very careful with a rebrand. I think it's important to do a rebrand when it's really needed, for sure. And there's certain KPIs that you need to look at when you do that. But more often than not, it's actually about small fine tunings and crafting more the positioning rather than a full rebrand. And it's always important to go back to the heritage of the brand and look at who the brand actually is and what they stand for, and be careful to not shift that too much, because we've seen a lot of examples of brands that have wanted to go completely in a different direction. Think about Jaguar recently. That's been like a huge conversation in our industry, and they had completely messed up their brand positioning and their brand story and their brand visual identity because they wanted to completely shift and go in a different direction. So a rebrand is good, but as long as you keep the essence of the brand that has got you to where you are today, because that's actually what's going to drive you forward as well.
What would you say it's the difference between having a presence and having a brand?
Well, this is easy because most people just want a presence. They think that if they go viral on TikTok, they're everywhere and that's brand, and it's definitely not. I mean, I'm someone that prefers building slowly, and it's more like a slow burn over time. But at the same time, I understand that social media is distribution. And so once you have that positioning clear and clarified and you're ready to go, then you have to really go for social media and try to go viral, try to be seen, try to boost that visibility as much as you can, for sure. But it's not the same to have a presence online than to have an actual brand. I think a brand needs time. A brand equity is built over many years, where consumers consistently see you show up and show up in the same way, standing for something, then they can associate you to certain values, certain products. Maybe you have invented something, maybe you have reinvented something, and so that's what they know you for. But it's really important to understand that it's really not just the presence that builds the brand over time. It's really the brand equity, and for that you need to be consistent and show up in the same way in front of your consumers over time.
What is something everyone should know about intellectual property?
That is not just a legal term. I think and I know this because I've worked with IP for a long time. In reality, for most of my career, I've really focused on IP, and I understood the holistic aspect of what an IP really is. And most people think of IP as a legal term that is really something you need when you need to trademark, a product or a brand. And it's really much deeper than that. Like, a strong IP can completely transform your business. Like, you can go from just being viral to being a brand through the use of IP. And if you look at, my favorite example, Disney, they've built $1 billion, brand and business through the usage of IP. And they have the same model that they use across all of their IPs. They have an initial story, and then that becomes a movie, and then the movie becomes merch or experiences or part of the park. And they create the whole universe around that one IP, and they recreate that multiple times over through the years. And so then that becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think that the misconception there is that IP is a legal term, where in reality, IP is what can fuel your brand in a way that it scales to infinity over years, and it can completely transform your business.
How do you know if you have, let's just say, the idea for the IP?
If you have an idea that needs protection, then you need an IP. That's what essentially IP is. IP is a trademark that protects a logo, a method, a material, for example, invention that you have, or something like a patent that you need to place on a certain technology that you've invented. So it's not just random ideas. My posts, for example, don't need trademarked, and they can't be trademarked. Whatever is public and generic can't really be trademarked in this way. But when you have something specific that people could potentially replicate and make money of, that's when you need to think how you can structure it in a way that it can be protected through a trademark. And so then it's really yours, and you can be safe in how you use it in your business.
Can you share with us, what was the first brand that you ever created?
Yeah, so I love this story because about 15 years ago, I was still in Madrid, and I decided to create a tea brand. And mind you, it was at a time where tea in Spain was not a big deal. And I think that the timing was a little off. I should have gone for coffee or something. But I had been visiting, Germany and Austria where tea was always a big deal. And I had the idea to create a tea brand. And I actually have it here. It's called Mas. And my friend Andres, he was a graphic designer, a creative director at Disney. He actually helped me design the whole packaging, and we created a whole visual identity, packaging ideas for the brand. And we imported the tea from Hamburg, actually from Germany. And I have to say, it was the best experience of my life. I think I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents, I grew up in Romania, and my parents were entrepreneurs. I always had the bug since I was little. But that was really the first time that I experienced the feeling of creating something that you can own. And I loved the whole thing. I loved the whole experience from beginning to end. I had the brand for about a year, and then we sold it. So it was such a good learning experience. And I have to say, on a personal note as well, I loved it because I could work with my husband in the business, and he was taking over the distribution of the brand, and I was more the creative behind the brand and the product. Yeah, it was that first experience that cemented my belief that I was a creator more than an executor. And it took me 15 years to start again and be in this position again to have a business, but I always knew that I was going to do it because I just enjoyed that process so much.
Well, that's really cool. That's really nice.